us today on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. It's Monday, June 24th, 2024. Hope you will have a beautiful week ahead. Today, Jeff is, of course, going to touch on our current events, something very interesting there. We have a three-quarter moon coming up this Friday. And our topic for today is UFOs, ghosts, and spirits and astral entities, and how astrology connects to all of this. So incredibly interesting. Take it away, Jeff.
Right. Yeah. Well, the first things I want to talk about is what's going on. And this actually kind of relates to this topic tonight. And of course, we've got a third quarter moon here coming up right this Friday. And for anyone that's aware of these dates, it's actually going to be this Friday at 2:54 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. If you're on the East Coast, extrapolate 3 hours ahead, or anywhere else in the world. And again, I always like to pay attention to the phases of the moon. The moon is the crucible that concretizes spirit and where it all manifests. And that also relates to an interactive consciousness that we all are in as well. It's why the moon has such an effect on emotions. So it's very, very powerful. And almost all the cultures of the world were always aware of the moon. Very interesting how, it affects civilization throughout time. So that's a big one. Also, of course, we've got the, United States, Trump and Biden debate. That's going to be very, very interesting. And we're going to get a lot more into Trump and Biden as we progress here in the podcast over the next month or two. Obviously, this is an election year. The whole world's kind of watching this because really there's a lot of varied opinions as to what's going to happen as to who gets in the White House, because it has a huge effect on the global, situations. And so that's going to be a lot. And of course, we're going to see Trump get sentenced here in July. And I think they're going to be pretty heavy-handed about that. Now, one of the things that I wanted to get into is I mentioned here 2 podcasts ago, and I've been mentioning it the last one a little bit too, and that is the planet Uranus. In fact, I just put out a newsletter about this. And the planet Uranus is, again, it was discovered in 1781, and very unusual planet. In fact, if you look at Uranus, it orbits 180 degrees on its side, and there's not an astronomer or scientist drawing breath that can tell us why. It's very interesting. The poles are almost 180 degrees on its side going around the sun. And when we look at astrology, astronomers always roll their eyes at astrology because they're looking at science, right? Hard science and astronomy. Whereas astrologers are always trying to make a connection between what's going on with the soul, what's going on in person's lives, and events of the world called mundane astrology. And we tie it to the same thing, which is you could say, astronomical phenomena that is called astrology. Well, every time, as I'd mentioned in the newsletter, that Uranus goes into the sidereal sign of Taurus. Now, you tropical astrologers are going to say, wait a minute, Uranus is way forward in tropical Taurus already, because there's about a 24-degree difference. But we're using the sidereal zodiac, which is what Vedic and Nadi astrology uses. And it is more accurate to where things are in the sky in the precession of the equinoxes. Whether you're a flat earther or a round earther, still works out that way. And it's known, the Pleiades is known as the 7 weeping sisters. And throughout all these different civilizations, the Greeks, the Aborigine Australians, and many different cultures throughout Europe have all talked about the Pleiades. There's the Greek legend, the 7 weeping sisters, or the daughter of Atlas. After Atlas had to carry the heavens on his shoulders, he was forced to leave his daughters, and Orion pursued the Pleiadian sisters. Why do they call them the weeping sisters? See, it's pretty much the first early portions of the sidereal sign of Taurus, somewhere around the first 6 to 7 degrees, that this nebula, and nebula is a word the astronomers use to not only depict stars within it, but also gas clouds and dust that forms ultimately through gravity and what have you to make the stars. But why am I going here? Because it affects where the world is right now. If you look at what's happening in the world, it's virtual insanity. Again, we've got more brewing tensions that the mind control news doesn't tell us going on over there with Russia, Ukraine, and again, this whole European pot that's boiling. And then we're seeing, again, the same things in the Middle East we've been mentioning. You've got Hamas now, and Hezbollah, and Israel, and Iran. Rita Bartiromo had a real good story about how the Chinese are buying up this huge amount of land in the United States. And not only that, how they're infiltrating into the stock markets and companies. And I think this is a lot deeper than just that. I think it has to do with what's going on in the global stage. And we had mentioned many podcasts ago about the web book that had, it's called The Great Taking. And the banking, our banker systems, which had come in very strongly with the Federal Reserve Act and all that, have had a huge effect on these wars. And there's an awful lot of evidence that they tend to fund both sides. Could that be what's going on right now? Now you might say, well, why is he bringing that up? Well, because it relates to Uranus. Uranus transiting the 7 weeping sisters always brings sorrow, war, or trouble in the earth. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now. I mean, even a year ago, if we'd have said, well, geez, could this kind of, or 3 or 4 years ago for sure, could there ever be any conceivable chance that there'd be a world war, or we'd be drawn into the possible conflicts with Russia and China and the Middle East? It's now becoming a very real possibility. And the astrology is showing that, because you see, it's going to sweep over a number of stars. The first one that Uranus and Mars are going to sweep over here in the first weeks of July is a fixed star called Kabbalistic. Well, what is it called? The Sword. And I can tell you, we're in a roller coaster ride right now, and I would love to be wrong, and I would love to say, oh, it's all going to be love and light. Well, it is all love and light. It's the humans that screw everything up. It's like I always say, I love the human race. It's the people that drive me nuts, right? So it's really a very interesting thing how the so-called Earth seems to go through, and I mentioned this in my newsletter, these tumultuous 7-year periods every 84 years. Why? Because it takes 84 years for the planet Uranus to go around the sidereal or tropical zodiacs. And again, I'd mentioned in my newsletter, the 7 years prior was World War II. We saw the whole world at war. The 7 years prior to that was the Civil War and all the unrest that was around that. The 7 years before that was a Revolutionary War. The 7 years before that was the parliamentary monarchy kind of war that was going on in Europe. So this is not, again, a fallacy. The science of astronomy, which is what astrology truly is, the ancient astrology, is showing us that the inconceivable or the unthinkable is possibly happening right now. And this is, again, trying to draw the world back into war. So this is bizarre stuff. It's really, really bizarre stuff. And I hope it doesn't happen. But again, we had been mentioning, I think, and we'll get much deeper into this, but as we begin to move into July and August and September, I think we're going to see some unprecedented events. I think we're going to see more earthquakes, that's for sure. There's been many speculations as to where they'll be. Some say San Francisco, some say no, it's the Pacific Northwest. Well, just yesterday we had some real big quakes down in the Caribbean. This is very powerful stuff, these planetary alignments, plus you add Uranus. There's been one thing for sure, many people, astronomers and astrologers alike, have found the correlations to Uranus and Earth weather and earthquake changes. So we're in it. We're likely to see all of the above. And I think when we look at the United States, and of course it's an election year, plus we could see all kinds of unrest coming because this Mars-Uranus conjunction to the most evil star in the sky, which I've been mentioning, which is again Caput Algol, also known as the head of Satan, is literally going to happen right in the middle of July. Well, what do we got happening here? We have the second Pluto return on the United States. This is huge. This is absolutely huge. This has never happened to this country before. We are in the sidereal Pluto return. And I hope it all goes smooth, but Pluto is very brutal. There's no doubt about that. And the other thing is when you add the Uranus, the Mars, and the conjunction of this fixed star, you're going to have Trump getting sentenced. That's going to be mayhem. You literally could have weather and earth changes off the charts. And again, the 7 weeping sisters is where Uranus is passing through for the first 6 degrees. It's a long time. So we'll get into more what the time frame is on that, but powerful stuff going on right now. So, this kind of relates a little bit to the topic I want to get into today, which is, again, speaking about ghosts, entities, UFOs and astral entities and spirits. Also, one of the things I want to say is this topic of ghosts, entities, astral spirits and demons and angels is so vast. I mean, we couldn't even begin to scratch the surface. This is a topic we could do 100 podcasts on and still never get to the bottom of. And I just wanted to mention that, but we're going to have some fun. We've got to get you to see a UFO or a UAP, Ella.
How are we going to do that?
Well, I don't know. I'm just going to have to march out there and till you see one.
Yeah, I might never see one, but it certainly is interesting, and it's fascinating how it's all interrelated, right? Because you can see, we spoke about him before, Chris Bledsoe, who was a guest on our show last year. You could see in his chart how he would have this deep connection to all of the work that he's doing now, the research he's doing, and the communication he's having with all these entities. It's pretty fascinating. So I'm sure you can see in anybody's chart how they will relate to what we call UFOs and ghosts and all of that. And some people do, some people will, and some people won't.
That's exactly right. Well, I was on a show this morning that's going to be coming out. It was called, Awakening. And it's wonderful because it's actually about how, in fact, we're speaking a lot about how my experiences with paranormal phenomena and UFOs and astral entities was all going on. It was called Breaking the Silence I was on this morning. Wonderful people. It'll be airing here soon. And we're actually going to do a live on that. And by the way, should we tell them, Ella? Should we tell them?
Oh, yes, please. I forgot to mention this in the opening, but we will be doing our first YouTube Live this coming Friday at 4 p.m.
Yes.
Pacific Standard Time. So join us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of fun, and we can take questions and do the best we can to answer them and hopefully have an interactive time that's wonderful, because we're going to start doing a lot more exciting stuff. And we'll also be breaking some other news possibly on this live show this Friday as well. So just wanted to bring that up. But anyways, this morning I did the show. I drove up to the studio. It's called Breaking the Silence, and it was all about experiences that people have with UFOs or ghosts or paranormal phenomena. And, I talked about how my journey started in the delivery room. I actually remember being born and I didn't want to come here. And I've had a lot of clients say the same thing. They remember standing outside of black holes, or they had different phenomena happen where they were stuffed in a body and the next thing they know, they were born. And I don't remember exactly being outside of a black hole, but I remember coming in and I was very sad. I didn't want to come. And my childhood kind of mirrored that as well, too, I might add. But anyways, what's important here is, and this is the topic for today, is how does astrology tie into any of this? Well, many of you out there listening might have heard of walk-ins, right? I've had so many people say, well, I had this phenomenon happen at this point in my life, and I think I'm a walk-in. Well, isn't that interesting? Because what does that mean? A walk-in means that your personality, or they feel their life completely changed, or it's not them anymore. It's like a total reality change or personality change. Psychology and psychiatry also looks at this stuff in various different ways. But when we look at texts, like I mentioned often, which is the Share Hagilgum or the Shar Hagilgum, it actually talks about things called iburs and maziks. And these are strange terms that just simply mean disincarnate souls or spirits or more advanced souls joining us. And again, children every 7 years, and all of us every 7 years, will go through significant changes. And if you remember the law of seven, you did a great little video for me up in Franklin Canyon that time, Ella, where we talked about the law of seven. And isn't this interesting? Seven shows up everywhere. You got seven holes and you had seven halls of heaven. 7 times 7 is the 49 dimensions of all the great worlds down into this one. And of course, the 7 weeping sisters, which I could rattle off for you, but they are believed to be the 7 half sisters of the 7 Hades, which of course is the 7 hells, right? So there's all kinds of lore into this stuff. And where am I going with all this? Well, so many different phenomena like UFO and ghosts. So really, what is a ghost? Let's take that one for a second. A ghost is nothing other than a disincarnate soul who may be lost. Now, there's a lot of great shows out there that are fun to watch. You know, they measure the temperature changes when ghosts are there and hauntings, etc. And I have many stories of clearings that I've done, which was, some of them were quite fun, and some of them were very traumatic on me. I actually got sick from it. And it's very dangerous stuff to do. But, and there's many practitioners who do this. And of course, many people who are in the Christian religion will hear, you know, that it's exorcisms, right? But I call it clearings, and you can call it whatever you like, but it's removing entities. Remember, Ella, you and I had an experience where you were running a business a while back and you had me clear it. And I had found that there was a very nasty drug addict who had passed away, and he didn't want to leave the environment. Remember that?
Oh, of course I remember that. Yeah. And it really didn't want to leave the environment. But then after you cleared it, we definitely felt a shift in the energy. And I think it took a day or two for it to completely leave. But yes, that entity was actually preventing people from coming into our space. It was really crazy. And a psychic walked in. I told you this. A psychic walked in when that entity was there. And she didn't come in to purchase anything. She came in to say, there's an entity in your space and it's right back there.
Yep. And that's what I had found. Yep.
My mind.
Yeah. He overdosed and he didn't even know he was dead.
So Jeff, something I've got to mention or just remind us both about, when we had cast a chart about that entity that was in my business, asking how it got there. And we saw that an employee who worked there brought that entity in.
That's exactly right. I remember that. And just for people listening, that's called an interrogation chart. Now, many modern astrologers will know that as horary. But if you're in the Vedic astrology world, they also call it Prashna. One of the most formidable tools any astrologer should learn if they don't know it. And that is casting charts for the moment based on a question. You can ask about anything under the sun. Really interesting relationships. You can ask about business, etc. And I always, when I get asked a question like you asked me, hey, what is this? How did this get in here? I literally cast a chart. I remember it was years ago. And the Eastern horizon became you, the querent. And of course, the 12th house is always hunting, or you could say attacking hidden enemies. And it showed up that an employee had bought that in. See, the 6th house is employees. So once you get used to all the houses in astrology, it's very fascinating because it unravels a riddle. And, you know, this is probably one of the most formidable tools. I've used this in forensics. I've used this in almost every day when I do readings. People will ask questions. And whenever they invoke that question, I will cast a chart, and that supplementarily helps me answer what the question is. And you just read it as based on the consciousness and the issues that are being asked about it. So yeah. It's really amazing.
Well, what we saw there certainly made sense, because when I understood which employee brought that in, I was like, oh, okay. Okay.
I remember that.
Wild.
Now, remember the podcasts that we've talked a lot about, the Magus Astrovolus. We've talked about the Shari Gilgam. Also, I mentioned, again, one of my favorite books is 30 Years Among the Dead. And also The Gateway to Truth by Dr. Carl Wickland. These two books, I think everyone should read, especially the Magus Astrovolus as well. The reason why is it shows us nobody dies. Now we start getting into astral entities and ghosts and all these interdimensional travelers. And I always like to mention the trees that are from God all the way down into where souls are created, which is absolute. Then we get into Braya, the many, many worlds in the 49 subdimensions in Braya. And then we get into the Yetziratic world, which is where the rotating galaxies, the nebulae, the gas clouds, all the stuff that creates the, you could say, solidity of spirit condensing into matter. And this, again, is always what really intrigued me about Nadi and Vedic astrology. Why? Because it's really studying the interactive connectors to spirit, psyche, and physical worlds. It's the interconnected mechanics, if you will, that are modulating or interacting with each soul, whether you're a human soul, an animal soul, a plant soul, or mineral. And this is really wild stuff. So we begin, one of the things we were talking about today on Breaking the Silence was the whole elements of who are we? And I always tell that story about, they say the spirit, psyche, and the soul is attached at conception to the embryo, right? By silver cord. And then when we exit the womb, that's when the synchronization of time, experience, and karma happen. Well, that's the celestial influences that most astrologers look at. And of course, that's known as the birth chart. And most astrologers will tell you, you have the ascendant, which is what? The eastern horizon at the time that you were born and drew first breath. Then you have the midheaven, which rules the 10th house. And of course, that's where the sun is at noon. You have the descendant, of course, which is where the sun descends. And then you have the IC, also known as where the sun is at midnight. And these are the four quadrants, and each of these houses matter. So it's like literally a harmonic imprint of the journey of the soul in these incarnations we call lives. But what happens when life ends? I always like that part with Patrick Swayze where the door opened for a minute, right? And he was going to go up into heaven, but then he had to stay because he had to catch Willie. Remember, he had to catch the bad guy, is Tony Goldwyn's character, who was literally trying to get the money, right? And of course, Patrick Swayze's character was accidentally killed over him trying to get the codes out of his wallet when he and Molly were walking home. So this is very, there's many stories that are real like this that are right on. And I mentioned another one of my favorite books is the Rabbi Fateh's Minot Yehuda, which is story after story after story after story of disincarnate ghosts or people who are on the other side, lost in the lower, we call Asiatic astral planes, and have now attached to other people. This is the core work that Dr. Carl Wicklund, the amazing psychiatrist, did. He actually ran the Psychical Institute in Los Angeles. I think it was from the 20s until about the late 30s or early 40s. It doesn't exist anymore. But I think it's some of the most powerful work that could ever be studied by all of us. It proves we don't die. And what's so important about this is that this relates to the pineal gland. Almost every culture, and especially the mystery schools, spent a lot of concern about the pineal gland. Why is that? Well, the poisoning of our water, our food, and our air blocks the pineal gland. And I also think in this journey of the sun around the central sun, which is about a 25,900 something year or 700 something year journey. And they say we get blocked as we pass through the dark rift, which is, I think, where we've been here for the last at least probably 700 years, maybe 1,000 years. And this dark rift is what knocked us out. And as we ascend over the next few thousand years, consciousness will begin to greatly expand. Because remember, there's no time, there's only experience. And we think in terms of time, there's no question. We get the bills of the first of the month. We all get a little older every year, right? We all get a birthday every year. And astrology is the science of time with the mechanics of astronomy interacting with the soul or the birth chart. And why that's germane is because they say when we exit this body, time stops, or at least time as we know it stops. And there may be other divisions of time that I hear in the astral worlds or in time of the soul and angels and all that. But this is really cool stuff, because I think if we can exit the body with more conscious awareness, we are highly likely to fare much better, rather than possessing or haunting places, etc. And this really places a focus on consciousness, or our, you could say, viewpoint of what the world is. And as that expands, I don't think we're going to be tricked as easy. And they say the evil spirits love to keep us reincarnating down into this world through the fear, through the parasitic sucking off the etheric energy, etc. So this is why we get so many astral entities. And back to what you were talking about earlier on the entity, and I had to clear him. He was so nasty. You couldn't reason with him. If anybody reads Dr. Carl Wickland's book, or Freeing the Captives by Dr. Fry, or The Unquiet Dead with Dr. Edith Fiore, you'll find a lot of these disincarnate souls, also known as ghosts or people who passed away. You can reason with them, but a lot of them you can't. They're very, very nasty. And Dr. Carl Wickland had many examples where some of these people were outright evil. So did Dr. Fry find that too in her regressionary work. And that's what I found with this entity in your case, Ella. We literally had to incarcerate them, and I actually got angels to help me take them away. And, one of the problems with doing this kind of work is your rational mind wants to tell you this stuff isn't real until you see it happen. And, a lot of people listening to me will go, oh, come on, he's full of crap. Well, did we get a result?
Yeah, we sure did. We sure did. And we've had other experiences with these entities coming into a space and then having to remove them. And you have different techniques on how to do that. But let me just ask, going back to the full topic, how do UFOs fit into this?
Very good. Very good. I'm glad you brought that up. I think we've had extraterrestrial people living among us since the beginning of time. That's my personal opinion. And the reason why, I think the earth is full of them. And I think they live among us. I think they hide from us, and they can do so by dimensional shifting and also literally shape shifting. And people say, oh, come on, how can you prove that? Well, I've seen it myself. I've actually witnessed people shapeshift, and both in their hands and in their heights and physical shapes. And again, we come back to what is the earth. Yes, we have the wars, we have the death, we have the pain, but we also have the beauty, and we have life. Life is magical. Think about what happens in the womb of a human being or an animal, or in the ground, when spirit takes hold of a physical embryo or a seed and now becomes manifesting out into life. And that's divine magic. It really, really is. And I think we need to really behold that a little bit and say, wow, there's something really divine here going on. And no matter which religion you are, you have to concede life's magical. Just watch a little kid, watch a little kitten, watch a little dog. I mean, it's magical. They're so frolicky and so playful. It's just magic, the energy that they have and the carefree genetics that are going on. They don't even think about life. They're just having fun, right? And it's absolutely amazing. And when we take it all in, a lot of these UFOs may be among us to help maintain the earth. That's some beliefs. Even in the keys in the books of Enoch talk specifically about this. The Rig Veda talks about this. Many of these ancient texts talk about this. The Sefer Ratziel is another one. That's the book of the Archangel Ratziel, which there's many versions of, let me tell you. And it's all about angels and spirits maintaining this place. And it also talks about entities, or you could say interbreeding with the human race. There's many people who have claimed that they've been abducted. And, there's been a lot of questionable eyebrow raising with this stuff. I actually had a chance to meet Dr. John Mack Camille, I met him out in Malibu about 20, 25 years ago. And Dr. Mack, if anyone knows who he is a psychiatrist who was killed in London very shortly after that. I think he was hit by a car. And that was mysterious too. But I can tell you, he had done deep, deep research into, are these people delusional? Are these people making this up? Are they crazy? And the answer is no. And Dr. Mack said he went by some of the strictest rules of psychiatry or psychiatric analysis. I actually knew a gentleman named Dr. Lear. I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but he was a medical doctor who was removing implants into people, in their teeth, in their arms, that they had claimed were put in them by extraterrestrial beings. I've seen it. I met Dr. Lear, and I know he was not delusional. This is a man who's a medical doctor, very rational person. He's done many wonderful interviews and documentaries and talks on how he has literally removed physical alien implants that have had materials that no one can identify in laboratories. This is like he'd taken these things out of teeth, out of people's arms, legs, all over the place, and literally found in laboratory analysis that the metals and materials in there were not anything we made. And yet it was not some arbitrary object. It was literally something that was implanted in this individual. So again, when we talk about ghosts, UFOs, and all this paranormal phenomena connected to astrology, how does it all fit? Well, we have to go back to, I think, what the ancients said in Vedic and Nadi astrology, and in also to credit the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, and the Greeks, and many of your ancient traditional astrologers, they were right. And that is, the earth is a place where time, karma, and space happen. And I think to just rely on secular society's normal interpretation of reality is a bit dangerous. You know, the religions have done many different things, and a lot of the principles religions espouse are really based in good principle. But I would say a lot has been left out. I mean, how much is lying in the bottom of the Vatican that has been completely stripped out of original Christianity? Read the Magus of Strovolos if you think I'm kidding. And secondly, what has been buried in just secular society alone? I mean, George was right. It's a big club they beat us over the head with every day, telling us what to believe. And this is an interesting thing. And I think what's so wonderful about this time is the internet, and these abilities to watch podcasts and get many different viewpoints. And they're not conspiracy theories. These are actual events and phenomena that need to be taken seriously. Just like, you know, again, it's fun to call them ghosts, but what they really are is wandering, confused souls, or they may even be angry souls. Read the Magus of Strovolos. He talks about case after case of psychonoetic dimensions that a person, when they're deceased, creates, and they often don't even know they're in that. They've just created it. And this is exactly what the doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and many other practitioners, and I myself have found, these individuals don't even know that they're not in bodies anymore. This is why they attract to the magnetic auras of human beings and they attach to them. I was mentioning just recently, I had 2 disincarnates come in who were previous clients of mine that were deceased, and really powerful, and it really affected me. And I had to rationalize a lot to get them to realize, hey, you can't use me as a parasitic vehicle. And they need to move on. They need to get their evolution. And I think if we all realize this, or at least become consciously aware of it before we exit these bodies, which we all will, all of us are going to exit the body known as death. Some of us will die young. Some of us will die old. And isn't that interesting? Even the astrology shows that. There's divisional charts in Nadi and Vedic astrology that actually indicate not only the probability of when your death will be, and it does vary, but it also shows how it might be. Many of us will just simply go to sleep. Now, that's the most blessed way to die. That's how my grandfather died. Just said, I'm tired. I got to go to sleep. Never woke up. And a couple of friends of mine just passed that way, which is wonderful. That's a blessing if we can go that way. Others, some of us will die in accidents, will die in traumatic ways, or through sicknesses, etc. But I think when we get past the morbidity of death and start looking at it and say, well, we're experiencers. That's why life becomes much more, I think, fun and exciting to enjoy, even though we might have our ups and downs and traumas. I mean, it puts a perspective, I think, on appreciation and gratitude of these lives, especially when times are good, when we have our health, when we have, prosperity, we have clean clothes, food to eat, etc. Because we see these roller coaster rides that the world goes through. And again, I hope I'm wrong, but to conclude, we are in a roller coaster ride right now with Uranus moving into the seven sisters of the Pleiades and all these fixed stars that it's going to be sweeping over this next 7 years.
Wild and extraordinary. All of it. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining us on Mondays. Please remember, if you'd like to, join us on Friday, this coming Friday at 4 p.m. We're going to do our first YouTube Live, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We hope to see you there. Have a beautiful week ahead. And thanks for joining us on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.